After he left DC Comics, but before he returned to produce Even Gods Must Die and The Hunger Dogs, Jack Kirby produced a sort of substitute Fourth World story called Captain Victory and the Galactic Rangers, which was eventually published by Pacific Comics in 1981 and 82. Morrows Publishing in 2003 released what it calls the Graphite Edition of Captain Victory, presenting Kirby's photocopies of his pencils of the proposed 50-page Captain Victory graphic novel. This time, Emmet and I discuss the Graphite Edition and what Captain Victory tells us about Kirby and the Fourth World. First, if you appreciate the work we do on Deconstructing Comics and our other podcasts and want bonus content, we'd love it if you'd support the show at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. Our monthly issue-by-issue look at 1960s Amazing Spider-Man comics is available to patrons, chipping in at least $4 a month. Check out our goals and rewards and pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim.
And this is Emmet.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Emmet near Melbourne. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Tim. I have a wildlife update for you.
Oh, good.
The kangaroos are back.
Mm-hmm.
The dirty protest has once again recommenced. And I encountered my first brown snake the other day.
Oh.
Which is bad. That's a bad thing. That's a very bad thing.
Poisonous?
They're incredibly poisonous. They're one of the most poisonous species of snake in the world. And I've got one in my garden, folks.
Well, I know there's so much in Australia that can kill you in terms of wildlife.
Yes. Yeah, we've got some deadly spiders in the surroundings as well. Look, everything's trying to kill me here. It's fine. The sun's trying to kill me. It's all... I shouldn't be here.
The weather's trying to kill you, everything.
The weather's definitely trying to kill me. It's incredibly hot, folks. It's incredibly hot. Like, it's over 32 degrees every other day. Like, this is insane.
Wow. Okay, so, we've been through a spate where it was mostly critiquing comics and old reruns of Marvel movie reviews, but I think we're going to be kind of on track here now with actual Deconstructing Comics episodes. Mm-hmm. And this time we are talking about kind of there's a lot of explanation to go with this, exactly what it is, but it's Captain Victory and the Galactic Rangers by Jack Kirby, the Graphite Edition, published by Morrows, apparently in 2003.
Yes, it's been acknowledged as like one of the attempts to try and push Captain Victory in some sort of context, because it's a late Kirby work, and popularly has been dismissed by a lot of folks. And again, like we've talked about this before, but as I was coming up and learning more about comics history, one thing that I was told was late Kirby is basically he's just completely off the deep end. He's lost the run of himself. And we had John Morrow on the podcast there a month or so ago for an interview.
Episode 753. He was the writer of Old Gods and New, which is all about Kirby's Fourth World.
Yes, and John's done an excellent job of not only curating in an archival sense Kirby's work, but also putting it in a context of the time. And I think a lot of dismissal of Kirby, he was out of touch. If you actually look at some of these later works, the sense of him actually being ahead of the game still, I find is quite strong. There are lots of concepts. We've talked about on and on about this, but he's an ideas man, and a lot of ideas tend to challenge whatever the current status quo is, and Captain Victory is no exception. I have a theory, which I will hold for our later conversation, as to what other works might have been inspired by this, because popularly, New Gods is held to be we've talked about this at length, and a strong influence on George Lucas, in particular Star Wars, Fantastic Four apparently is in there too because of Doctor Doom and Darth Vader. But New Gods is seen to be a sort of precursor to Star Wars, almost conceptually. And Captain Victory is Kirby's attempt to try and finalize whatever he was working on, these concepts he's working on with New Gods, in this sort of legally distinct format. And
and a little bit based on Star Wars.
Yeah, he's getting his digs in, which is great. I really enjoy it. But yeah, there's a lot here, and as you say, the Graphite Edition not only includes some of the retained photostatic artwork that Kirby had held onto, gathered together here in a sort of presentation of how the original intention for the work should have been, but you also have the screenplay overview.
Right.
And that's what this Graphite Edition was known for. I've seen a lot of people refer to this edition because of the screenplay.
I see. Yeah, so I should mention, this came out in 2003 in print. Now you can only buy it on the Morrows website as a PDF. And yeah, as Emmett said, this is mostly photocopies of old 1970s style thermal photocopies that were somewhat deteriorated by the time they were scanned for this book. So sometimes the lettering is a little hard to read. But it's okay. So I guess in the late 70s, Kirby had penciled a 17-page Captain Victory story that was supposed to be for a line called Kirby Comics. But the funding for Kirby Comics fell through. And then he added pages and turned it into a 50-page graphic novel, and Mike Royer inked it. But it still sat unpublished for some years. And then in 1981, Pacific Comics agreed to publish it, but it was broken down into issues. I guess the first 2 issues were from this 50-pager.
And this is the version, the Pacific Comics version is the one that's, I think, known as the first attempt to have a creator-owned book in the market and in direct competition with Marvel and DC.
Right, and also it was the first mainstream comic sold only to comic shops, the way everything is now in the U.S. So it began
now we're talking
the direct market.
Era of the direct market. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Just the very beginning of it. Right, and then you mentioned the screenplay in the back. I didn't read the whole thing of the screenplay. I got started on it, and the beginning of it was interesting. But yeah, this was after he did the 50-page graphic novel, but before Pacific picked it up, he and Steve Sherman put together this screenplay of kind of the same story, I guess, not exactly the same.
What I find interesting about his work as well is, and it comes up in the screenplay, is that unlike a lot of the heroes that we grew up with in our childhoods and we're exposed to through the likes of George Lucas and so forth, Kirby's characters have a sex drive. They actually want to have sex. And we're seeing the results of that now with a lot of the media that we consume, particularly in the cinemas, is weirdly sexless. Like if you look at a Marvel movie, you may get a chaste peck on the cheek. Maybe. Like there's no passion there. But you can never accuse Kirby of that. And the screenplay sort of summary that we have in this book, you have the Lightning Lady, who's the leader of the Insectons, who's the sort of antagonist. But there's a whole description here of she's really attractive. Victory's fighting his baser instincts. God bless Kirby, God bless him.
Well, and it's Kirby related, but in the Eternals movie, there was a kind of shoulders up sex scene.
Right, and again, my goodness. So there was 2 movies that came out. Okay, you've set me off now, Tim. There were 2 movies that came out in 2022. 2 superhero movies that came out in 2022, which were said to be the most sexually charged superhero movies we've ever seen. One of them was The Eternals, a damp squib of a movie that simply lay there. And like, am I choosing my words deliberately to reflect on the nature of that sex scene Tim mentioned? Yes, I am. It was just like, what is this? What am I looking at? What is this? The entire movie is like that. It's just sort of, and then some stuff happened, and I guess we talked about philosophy for half an hour. It was a ridiculous movie, and I'm really annoyed when people say, actually, it's deep when you think about it. And I go, no, actually, it's a crap movie built on a pretty deep concept. That's what's happened there. The other movie, the other contender, and perhaps this is of interest to you, Tim, given your other podcast, was The Batman.
Okay.
Now, in The Batman, Robert Pattinson's Batman and Zoe Kravitz's Catwoman supposedly have this incredibly sexually charged attraction. And we were told over and over again in the media reports and the interviews that, oh, yes, this is a really, romantic, passionate affair between these two characters. I watched that movie. I have no idea what they're talking about. They both look bored all the time. The most intimate moment between them is a shared motorcycle ride, separate motorcycles down a road. It's as erotically charged as Vin Diesel and whoever his male co-star is in The Fast and the Furious. That's the level we're at. Really upsetting to me because these are wish fulfillment fantasies, and as we know, Neil Adams' Batman definitely has sex. We were brought up to believe that. He's a barrel-chested, hairy man who definitely has sex with Catwoman. And in this movie, we had this version of the character who's just sort of tortured and neurotic and insular, and I had no idea what anyone was. There was no passion at all in that movie. It was cold and weirdly angular, and I couldn't see half what's happening, although that might be the onset of old age. Anyway, Kirby, you couldn't catch Kirby doing that stuff. He's all about it. He's got these big ladies who know what they want, and sort of heroes who have to, figure out whether they want to put in a day being superhero or maybe bed down the villainess.
So I had wanted to talk about like the actual Pacific Comics series because in Old Gods and New, Morrow mentions that the later issues of that series seem to be basically an ending to the Fourth World, but with the character names and faces changed somewhat so that DC wouldn't get angry. But those actual issues you have to go to eBay, basically. They're out of print. And I don't know, for me to order from the States through eBay, I always seem to end up spending more on the shipping than I do on what I'm buying. So I don't know, maybe down the road we could do that. But to start with, this was the easiest version of Captain Victory to get our eyes on.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to do some long box deep diving in some markets around Melbourne. I'm sure I'll be able to hunt them some now, but yeah, postage is prohibitively expensive, particularly now. Apparently it's the fault of Ukraine. Okay, Mr. Postman, what are you talking about? That doesn't even make sense. But this is what I've been told.
Well, probably fuel surcharges because nobody's buying energy from Russia anymore. And I'm not sure if I can afford to go to the States this summer. But anyway.
But yeah, I think the Graphite Edition does a worthy job of assembling the sort of ideal form for the Kirby work as originally intended, and with some contextual explanatory pieces which are already helpful, coming in fresh as I did. But as you pointed out, and I take nothing away from the folks at Tomorrow's Press because they did a fine job here. But yes, some of the pages were difficult for me to read.
Yeah, certain words are just impossible to make out.
Yeah, but I still came away with a sense of again, just oversized technology and this idea of man interfacing with a piece of AI to accomplish a feat. That's here again. You've got the previously mentioned Lightning Lady and the evil Insectons, but this idea of them sort of burrowing their way through planets and just like reducing them into rubble, that's really interesting. Again, he keeps coming back to this image of worlds being reduced because this parasitic species have just like completely invaded and just sucked all the nutrients out of the soil and everything else. And then the concept of Captain Victory himself, because he dies pretty quickly. Spoilers, folks. But he dies pretty quickly. But then they've got a bank of clones ready to step in. And this is where my brains are ticking over in terms of, I can see other people who've done this as well after the fact. But I think what's interesting there is it's a similar notion to what Kirby's getting at with some of the New God stuff previously, which is this idea of a forever war that won't allow the hero to die. Like, it's not the way everyone just resurrects him. It's completely matter of fact. And I don't think it's intended as a heroic moment. I think it's a tragic moment. They won't let him die. Like, the characters try to stop him from doing the thing that leads to his death. He's taking it unnecessarily.
No, don't do that. And he does it. And then, they break out the clone and put his memory tapes in it. But the memory tapes don't include the moment of his death. So he doesn't actually remember dying. He just remembers everything sort of up to that moment.
So it felt quite depressive to me in a way. It felt like a really negative concept of this deathless hero, that the war requires him to continually fight in the front lines. And there's something kind of upsetting there, but really, really interesting.
Yeah, apparently it's a kind of a common arrangement in that world. In Old Gods and New, I think it mentioned that Scott Free had apparently, or the Captain Victory version of Scott Free had also done that, and he was down to his last clone because he's older than we saw Scott Free in New Gods or in Mr. Miracle.
Yeah, and it's sort of, again, I think it speaks to Kirby's own experience as a soldier and coming back to the States, and then seeing the likes of Stan Lee, who got to sit in a propaganda office and come up with pamphlets on not contracting STDs. He's come back to this civilian life, and then the wartime experience is being gussied up in his media as this heroic, falsely heroic, propagandistic, wasteful fantasy. And like, he's got these memories of being in the European theater of war and just being traumatized by what he saw. The idea of a soldier who you just keep shipping out over and over again, it speaks to the sort of meat market of war that he lived through. I think there's something there.
Yeah, I was thinking about his war experience too. Now, the Pacific Comics series had, I guess, 13 issues plus a special, and the ones that were kind of the pseudo end of the Fourth World were issues 7 through 12, but this story also has some Fourth World echoes in that, again, Earth is being invaded by some kind of insect race. In this case, it's the Insectons. And I was kind of wondering why he was doing that again. I mean, I could think of a lot of possible reasons. Maybe he really likes the story of the Egyptians and the locusts, or the Israelites. Or maybe he thought he wanted to do a better job of the story than he did the first time. Because I went back and looked at New Gods 9 and 10, and it seems like most of that story is people standing around talking.
Yes, but also if you look at the art as well, what we can see of the art here, some of the faces are very familiar faces. Now, it could just be that he's got certain types of faces, but it could also be that he had work that he had done that he's repurposed here. That could be a factor. That he didn't have to reinvent the wheel. He's got this material that he can repurpose for this story, and explore the same themes again that he's interested in. It's a different story. I'm not saying he's. But there are elements in it that are very visually familiar, and I wondered if he simply reassembled some stuff. So there is a sequence where a character has been brainwashed.
Many people have been kind of brainwashed into being drones. Sure. Yeah, which I thought was an interesting element that I think was not in New Gods. And we see one guy who temporarily breaks out of it, and they zap him with some kind of ray, and he falls back in line again.
And I thought he looked a bit familiar to me, and I wondered if he was originally one of the characters who had the anti-life elements of the anti-life equation from New Gods, from Orion, sorry. And maybe this was a sequence of one of the characters have been captured and then fighting against that influence and getting free, but then getting brainwashed again and forced to go back in line, literally. That was a thought that occurred to me. But again, it might be just that these were. This is just he's got certain types he draws, and he's just used the type that he's previously used.
Captain Victory looks a lot like He-Man, actually.
He does look a lot like He-Man. That's true. Yeah.
Of course, he predates He-Man, but
he predates He-Man, and Kirby worked on a He-Man rival, I believe, in the sort of toy explosion era. There was a character who got an animated series and everything as well, but wasn't as popular as He-Man. But Kirby had worked on. I said Conan because He-Man was originally meant to be a Conan toy line, but they changed their mind.
More on Captain Victory Graphite Edition coming up. But first, a reminder to join us for 20th Century TV and music trivia quiz videos and more on our Patreon page. Every month, patrons donating $4 a month or more also get a full-length podcast episode reviewing an issue of The Amazing Spider-Man from the 1960s. Check out our goals and rewards at patreon.com/deconcomics. If you'd rather give a one-time donation, you can do so via PayPal by sending it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
Warlord Worlds,
a fan podcast devoted to the comics of writer and artist Mike Grell, including The Warlord, John Sable, Green Arrow, Starslayer, and Shaman's Tears.
I'm Ruth.
And I'm Darren.
Please join us as we discuss the stories, characters, and art in the many excellent comics from writer and artist Mike Grell.
Special episodes feature interviews with Mike Grell himself.
And special segments feature great guests discussing the Legion of Superheroes.
Listen at Podbean, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or visit warlordworlds.com.
Warlord Worlds is part of the Rad Adventures Network at radadventuresnetwork.com.
But yeah, the Captain Victory hanging out with a cop, a sheriff. It's that contrast of like the divine presence and like the ordinariness of the Earthman.
Yeah, and the cops believe him pretty quickly.
Yeah,
they don't say, "What's this wacko doing in these weird clothes, telling us about an alien invasion?" But I guess he's got the huge spaceship floating over them, and they can see the insectons coming in. So I guess believing him is the only option.
Yeah, I find it interesting that Kirby and Ditko both, whenever they introduce a authority figure and Lee's not there with them, there tends to be just cut to the chase type ramp up. It's like, okay, Mr. Policeman, I need to go stop that many octopus armed man. And go, okay, I'll come with you. We'll do that together. There's never any sort of who are you? Let's have a discussion. I'm going to take you in. You're going to have to explain yourself to the mayor. There's none of that. There's never any of that sort of ambiguity of the authority figure. It's always let's just sort this situation out.
Yeah, the cop is always, sure, I believe you, no problem, because the writer told me it was all true. So. Yeah, I had a few notes about the Star Wars connection, or specifically a quote from the foreword of this book, Captain Victory began as a name in a 1960s character concept drawing, later renamed Captain Glory. With the release of Star Wars now the forward says 1976, but actually 1977, some concepts of which Kirby felt were appropriated from his own 1970s Fourth World comic book series, Jack decided to resurrect the name, Captain Victory, and go George Lucas one better, creating his own property using Star Wars as his inspiration. And I noticed on the first page of the story itself, it says, "This is how it will happen when the Star Worlds come to Earth." I don't think that was a coincidence that it sounds like something else.
Yeah, and it's funny just how they've set this out here as well, because that Marvel also have a Captain Glory character.
Okay.
He's a Kree soldier, space soldier. He's a character in the Captain Marvel stories, but again and again we're reminded it's a similar situation with Alan Moore. There you go, folks, have a drink. Alan Moore and Jack Kirby, the crumbs left on the table will get turned into concepts. Like whatever they've left, anything that's been scribbled on a notepad somewhere, that's going to get a 12-issue miniseries. So yes, Captain Glory is also a Marvel-owned character.
Yeah, it was 1960s character concept. So if it was the 60s in Kirby, that's where he was.
Yeah.
So
it's going to get hoovered up somewhere.
True believer.
Yeah. So I might as well throw this in here as well. Now, this may or may not be due to the fact that I spent my Christmas break playing video games, and I wound up playing Mass Effect. The Legendary Edition of Mass Effect. Mass Effect is a BioWare EA released science fiction video game. You play a character called Commander Shepard. It's set in the future. Humanity has made first contact and is now interacting with all these other alien species. And over the course of 3 games, Captain Shepard becomes aware of an apocalyptic race of ancient entities that are going to reap the universe. They're called the Reapers. They're going to kill all organic life, and nobody believes him. And you play this character, and you're trying to unite the galaxy to fight back against the Reapers. Why am I talking about this here? Well, because in Mass Effect 2, the beginning of the game, the character dies. He's killed immediately. And then you are promptly resurrected.
Wow.
And you, technically, you're not a clone, although there is a clone, but that comes later. Technically, you're not a clone. You are somehow, with science fiction, space magic, resurrected, despite being brain dead and exposed in the vacuum. You are brought back to life. But when I was reading this, and this idea of Captain Victory and his sort of a crew of aliens, and they're all working together, and they're the Federation that they represent isn't the Star Trek Federation that's all lovey-dovey. Like they explicitly talk about how member planets have to pay their dues. Like it's actually you buy into the Federation. Like that's part of the point.
Right? Yeah, and they're saying Earth has not paid its dues, but we can't let this stand. We got to help them anyway.
Yeah. This felt a lot like Mass Effect to me. It's similarly sort of downbeat, more cynical version of the space opera. I do wonder if somewhere in BioWare in the early 2000s cracked out their Jack Kirby Captain Victory issues and said, we can use some of this. Now, video games are known for like drawing on a wide variety of influences. I'm not saying it's a ripoff. It's you take what you can, but it felt like Mass Effect felt like a spiritual cousin to Captain Victory to me. So anyone out there listening, if you like your role playing video games, Mass Effect's an interesting series. It's concluded. There's 3 games. That's it. Within a year, this will probably be an out-of-date statement. Someone will make a sequel. But I felt as if somebody read this who was in the writing room for that game.
Interesting. Yeah, now as far as like Star Wars-ish stuff, I mean, in the part that he added to the beginning to make it into 50 pages, there is some like outer space flying around and shooting at things and blowing stuff up. So I guess he was thinking about Star Wars when he did that. And it gets to the page, it's page 22 of the PDF that was the beginning of the 17-page story. And by that time, Captain Victory's already on Earth and waiting for the Insectons to come.
Yeah, but then if we're going to reflect on the Star Warsness of it all, in the preceding section, the pages he did after the original short comic to try and fill out the concept more, you have a Death Star situation, but it's the good guys. They do
true.
blow up a planet, but they blow up a planet for a good reason. Folks listening, I use inverted commas. But I think it's a clear allusion to the Death Star scene.
The World Killer. I see it here on page 17 of the PDF. It doesn't look like the Death Star. It's not a big orb, but sure.
The effect is the same. It's designed to blow up a planet, and but it's almost like the Rangers are performing sort of galactic hygiene. It's like removing a cancerous growth. This planet has been riddled by the Insectons. It's no longer safe to be left there because potentially there's Insecton pods or hives or whatever still present.
Also, with Star Wars in my mind, there's this little rotund guy called Mr. Mind. And he's not a droid, but you know who I thought of.
Yeah. I assume we're both thinking of Yoda.
I was thinking of R2-D2. Because he's kind of
okay.
R2-D2 shaped.
Yeah, okay.
Although he's not a droid. But
He's not a droid, but he's got cybernetic elements to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he talks like English, not beeps and whistles.
Yes. And then later in the Star Wars comic books that came out, the Dark Empire series. Oh my God, folks, I'm such a bloody nerd. We were introduced to a Jedi who was a man floating in an orb. He was an Eggman. So somebody took that idea as well. And that was in the 90s when he appeared. But yes, there's a Jedi who is basically cybernetically encased in an orb. But the other ones I also thought of because he's using these mental powers, and he's got these very pronounced eyebrows. I thought of the Mentax from Frank Herbert's Dune.
Okay.
I wondered if that was potentially Kirby was aware of Dune. I'm sure if that was an idea, because this in Frank Herbert's work, psychic powers are heavily relied upon, and the society has had some massive conflict where they won't rely on AI anymore. There's no artificial intelligence, so they use drug-altered abilities to control space, and a lot of that is sort of coded as psychic abilities. And some of the practitioners in this world are these sort of human machines called Mentax, and they've got these very pronounced eyebrows. And I wondered if maybe that was a factor, or he just likes drawing curly eyebrows. I mean, to be fair, he does. He does like doing that.
The cover of this book is... Well, it's the same illustration from issue 1 of the Pacific Comic series, with some of the copy on it changed. I saw the original Pacific Comics cover on Wikipedia, and I was just a little comment about it, but compared to today, thinking of what it would say today, it was surprising to me. Jack Kirby's name is not on the cover anywhere of the original comic. And I guess the creator names weren't generally on comics covers in 1981, but you would think it's Jack Kirby that they would want to announce that. But
Kirby's the ideas man. Kirby is the one who tries to sell you on the concept. When the New Gods came to the Fourth World, started at DC, it was Kirby. Kirby's new epic. They were selling the book on Kirby, and they expected to sell on Kirby in his name, but Kirby was trying to sell it on the story. And then when he came back to Marvel again, it was like Kirby's back. I think there was that tension between how the publishers saw his popularity as associated with him and him as a resource, him as something that's commercialized, versus
logical way to think.
He saw it as artistic expression. He was trying to
so he wanted the concept to attract readers rather than his name.
Correct. That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, that might have been at his behest that his name was not on the cover.
Exactly what I'm wondering. This is him. This is his attempt to get this story finally concluded, because it's very much a spiritual successor to New Gods.
And I think Pacific, not being the powerhouse that DC ever was, they did pretty much anything Jack wanted. You want creator ownership? Here you go. We don't want your name on the cover? Well, all right. Pretty much whatever, I guess. We're not going to argue with you. You're Jack Kirby. So
yeah, you can see it. Like it's sad that he had to go to this protocol just to get that kind of arrangement happening. Because, as I said, I think in any other commercial arrangement, he would have been himself a sort of asset, a commercial asset. To the point where, at that juncture, I would say, well, then just put his name on the thing and then let somebody else do all the donkey work. And, he can just give a pass and let it go out the door. But no, they wanted him working as well. They wanted to get their money's worth out of him. It's a shame. I just wanted to note as well, when we talked about Captain Victory previously, I mentioned that I had really enjoyed the Joe Casey run from Dynamite.
Yeah, there have been later series of Captain Victory that aren't by Kirby. Yeah,
and there's Casey worked with like a number of different artists on his Captain Victory book. He had a deliberate contrasting of different artistic styles within one issue. You'd have the likes of Fred Dalrymple and Jim Moffat, and like completely different approaches, completely different visual styles. And he was very much coming at it from the point of view of, we can't do Kirby. We need to actually get a bunch of people just to come up to Kirby. He's been quite, he's genuflecting in front of Kirby almost. And I read an interview with him on CBR promoting the series. And he talks about how, as a young person, he picked up Captain Victory in 1981. And he had no idea who Kirby was. He just really loved the comic. So
interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Somebody who'd never seen the 60s Marvel stuff or whatever.
Yeah. So there you go. There's the perfect Kirby reader. There's somebody who actually just wanted to read this funky space opera story, and loved it.
Yeah, and putting his name on the cover wouldn't have helped if you didn't know who Kirby was.
He knows there's a guy with space lasers and a spaceship, and he's standing.
And clones.
Yeah. Give it to me. Yes, please. So there you go. The Kirby found his ideal fan, and that fan went on to do his own Captain Victory book, and it was pretty decent.
Captain Victory and the Galactic Rangers Graphite Edition is published by 2 Morrows. Check the link in the show notes for more info. You can help the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read it and record our critique. This Saturday on Critiquing Comics, Adam and I discuss the second issue of Galacto Pit Fighter, Kurt Burdick's over-the-top violent but well-done series featuring a vicious fighting alien. Then next Wednesday, Jason and I critique a silent comic written by a 13-year-old, with large, detailed panels. The book is Christiania by Abi Bihi and artist Taka, a take on the ills of social media by someone who doesn't remember a world without online culture. So a double dose of critiquing comics coming over the next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.